Alcohol and violence. If you talk to a policeman on a beat in any one of these American cities, alcohol is a mildly addictive, readily available drug that is responsible for more damage in our society than any other drug on the street, and it is also associated in a dramatic way with violent behavior. Barry McCaffrey, former U.S. drug czar, 1998. In the Campus Life section, we detailed numerous ways that alcohol contributes to violent and aggressive behavior at colleges and universities. Of course, alcohol-related violence is not limited just to institutions of higher learning. It is rampant throughout our society. In fact, the extent to which alcohol is associated with violent crime is arguably far greater than the average person appreciates. The following excerpt from the federal government's report, The Economic Costs of Alcohol and Drug Abuse in the United States, 1992, provides an overview of the problem. Numerous studies have found that problem drinkers, alcohol abusers, and alcoholics appear to be overrepresented among adults convicted of violent crimes, and people convicted of violent crime often report alcohol consumption immediately prior to their crime. Furthermore, research demonstrates that the degree of aggressive response is proportional to the amount of alcohol consumed. Empirical data on jail and prison inmates suggest that alcohol consumption also appears to be associated with violence. Inmates are more likely to have been under the influence of alcohol prior to a violent crime than for an economic crime or other types of crime. So what are the raw figures? The U.S. government estimates that alcohol contributes to 25 to 30% of all violent crime in America, including 30% of homicides and 22.5% of sexual assaults. However, the approach federal researchers used to calculate these figures attributes the use of alcohol as a primary cause of violent behavior in only 50% of the cases where the perpetrator had been drinking. Yes, you read that correctly. In order to be conservative with their estimates, researchers only consider booze to be a contributing factor in half of the cases in which alcohol was actually involved. This means that in reality, alcohol was involved in some manner in 60% of homicides and almost half of all sexual assaults. Regardless of whether the estimates are conservative or not, the raw figures are striking. According to federal government data, 7,655 homicides in the United States in 2001 were attributable to excessive alcohol use. Alcohol use is also frequently associated with domestic and partner violence. According to a 2002 report by the U.S. Department of Justice, 2/3 of victims who suffered violence by a partner reported that alcohol played a role, and among spouse victims, 3 out of 4 reported that the offender had been drinking. Of course, alcohol-related violence is not limited solely to the United States. Similar trends exist throughout the world. A 2006 World Health Organization report assessing alcohol use and violence included the following statistics. In England and Wales, 50% of victims of interpersonal violence reported that the perpetrator was under the influence of alcohol at the time of assault. In Russia, around 3/4 of individuals arrested for homicide had consumed alcohol shortly before the incident. In South Africa, 44% of victims of interpersonal violence believed that their attacker was under the influence of alcohol. In Tianjin, China, a study of inmates found that 50% of defendants convicted of assault had been drinking alcohol prior to the incident. We recognize that alcohol's association with violence remains a controversial subject in some circles. Some experts, especially those in the domestic violence community, argue that violence is not caused by alcohol per se. Rather, they assert that abusive partners possess personality traits that contribute to both their drinking and their violent behavior. We are sympathetic to this viewpoint and do not wish to create the impression that alcohol is the sole cause of domestic violence. That said, most domestic violence experts acknowledge that booze is a serious risk factor in abusive relationships. For example, a team of investigators at the University of Buffalo assessed the impact of alcohol use in relationships with histories of interpersonal violence. They concluded that incidents of male-to-female physical aggression were 8 times more likely on days when men drank as compared to days when they did not. Acts of severe male-to-female physical aggression were 11 times more likely on days when men consumed alcohol. In a follow-up study examining the effects of alcohol and other psychoactive drugs, cannabis, cocaine, and heroin, on interpersonal violence, investigators again found that alcohol significantly increased the likelihood of male partner violence, as did cocaine. Conversely, cannabis was not associated with an increased likelihood of physical aggression. Of course, the use of alcohol alone does not always instigate violent behavior, but as the University of Buffalo researchers found, this behavior is far more likely to occur on nights when drinking takes place. So, when we propose that legalizing marijuana would likely lead to a reduction in domestic and community violence, we are envisioning a future where marijuana is not only legal, but where domestic violence counselors feel it is appropriate to advise abusive partners to reduce or eliminate their alcohol intake by consuming marijuana as an alternative. As we noted in the previous chapter, in the professional sports world, league officials have taken the exact opposite approach. By default, pro athletes generally do not have the option to consume any recreational intoxicant other than alcohol. As a result, they often find themselves in bars or at nightclubs where alcohol and violence regularly mix. National Basketball Association star Paul Pierce was in a nightclub in 2000 when he was stabbed 11 times. NFL star Plaxico Burress was in a nightclub in 2008 when he accidentally shot himself in the leg with a gun he carried for his own protection. And NFL star Adam "Pac-Man" Jones was in a nightclub in 2007 when he was involved in a shooting that left a bouncer at the club paralyzed. As these types of events have become more frequent, it's hardly any wonder that former NFL star Chris Carter told ESPN, "The number one problem in the NFL isn't steroids, it's alcohol."